It was in Amsterdam 2000 when a miracle started that no one could have anticipated.
Dr. Graham asked if I would bring together 600 strategists from throughout the world to take one segment of Amsterdam 2000. And we decided during that time that we would invite people to come to a room, 600, and meet around 75 tables, and we would talk about everything that had to do with the completion of the Great Commission and the fulfillment of the Great Commission.
It was the third day when we were gathered together, and Paul Eshelman stood up, who at the time was leading the Jesus Film Project, but was starting to really study people groups in a whole new way. Stood up and talked about the least reached or the unengaged people groups, at that time called untargeted people groups of the world. And there was about 230. Well, that's when Bruce Wilkinson came to the platform. He was working with Paul emceeing the whole meeting. He came up to the microphone and said, there shouldn't be any untargeted people groups in the world. Just the idea that there would be untargeted people groups means we're not doing our job.
I said, we lead the vast majority of the Earth's Christian army in this room. And if we decided together today, let's finish it.
And there was a growing sense in the room that this is something that was deeply on God's heart, and that He had given the body of Christ everything that was needed to reach these people groups.
And eventually I challenged the people and said, why don't you get around with a group from your organizations from all over the world and take a look at all those sheets of all the unreached people groups, and why don't you pick the ones you feel God is calling you and your organization and take ownership of this.
And so he said, if you'll take 1, 2, or 5, come up and shake Paul's hand and say, we're taking 2 from our organization.
One person said, well, I'll take 1, and another person said, I'll take 3, and another guy said, I'll take 10. He was a layman, he didn't know what he was talking about. But to his credit, I met him out in India doing it.
And I just stood back and watched God tap people's hearts here, here, here. People came up, some of them were weeping, they embraced each other, and they put their name, and you could see things were happening in the heavenlies at that moment. The blood of Christ was being applied to these groups that have yet to hear. He died for them.
It was this electric environment. I mean, really, it was one of the most exciting moments that we had experienced.
And we got up to about 141 and nobody came. Nobody, they were all done. There was no one else coming forward.
I invited the men and women to consider coming forward again and making commitments if they felt God was leading them. A few did, and then it just stopped.
I mean, it completely went quiet in the room. As exciting was all the euphoria over adopting them, I mean, the opposite end was the discouragement we all felt at the quiet, because it just stopped.
And I stood back from the pulpit and was praying quietly, saying to the Lord, Lord, every time I've ever watched you do something, you never did it halfway. You always completed it. Whatever you want, please complete it.
And I was with Steve Douglas, who just become president of Campus Crusade for Christ. We were at the table together. He was our table moderator. And he knew I was with YWAM. And so he leans over and he goes, well, why don't our 2 organizations, YWAM and Campus, finish it? You know, take the rest of the list of the 232.
And then all of a sudden, I saw a table out there, the table I was seated at, because it was the only table that had an empty chair on it. It was buzzing back and forth. And everybody else was kind of quiet, and these were key leaders in the country. And I thought, that's unusual for them to be talking like at this moment.
My mind is spinning. I'm looking at the list on the table, because the ones that are left are the hardest of the groups. I mean, these are the groups where you could go in, but maybe you wouldn't come out.
And then all of a sudden, there was consensus around this table. I was watching them, and they were nodding like this.
And then somebody came up from table 71 with a note that said, table 71 takes the rest.
There was shouting in heaven, literally. I can't imagine what the angels must have sounded like when finally the sons of men stepped up to the bat in such a way that Christ's agenda, what he's waiting to be completed, has finally become our most important finish line.
And I'm sitting back at the table thinking, oh my gosh, what did we just do? You know, we took responsibility for 120, 130 people groups. I think Steve was feeling some of the same.
We rallied and actually started working overtime. We worked some during the breaks. We actually met past the end of the time that our group was supposed to end.
Steve and I look at each other and, okay, we committed to reach these groups. What's reach? You know, so we're trying to grapple with what are the key elements of what we call reach with these groups. And so we just named the obvious. We said, well, first of all, we need church planting.
I was at a different table, and at the break time, David Garrison, who was the global strategist for the International Mission Board and on my staff, came and said, you've got to come over to this table because something's happening.
And he said, Avery, we need this. And we describe it, and he goes, I'm in. He pulls up a chair. Well, then we know we need Bibles, obviously, translated Bibles, and there were no Bibles in those languages yet for these groups. At the time, the president of Wycliffe was Roy Peterson.
And during a break time, I was at a table adjacent to Table 71. The group at Table 71 called me over and said, you've got to come over and listen to what we're thinking about.
It just works like that until all of these main categories we call reach all have their leaders sitting at the table.
You know, every session we were just building one after another until we came to a time of developing a contract with one another, a commitment that we all signed by the end of the time.
And we said, is this what we're committed to? And the answer was yes. We are committed to the number 0. That someday, people who do research would search to and fro throughout the earth, and they would find 0 unengaged, unreached people groups.